You still have faith that Tom Skye did not commit this crime?
Absolutely. I 100% believe that. I know he didn't. I understand he had to defend himself, but in the situation I would have done the same thing. But he did not kill his brother-in-law.
I'm Fran Lucca. On Channel 17 Reports this week, we'll examine the case of Thomas Skye, an American Indian serving a 15-year to life sentence here at Attica for the fatal stabbing of his brother-in-law more than 3 years ago in the city of Lockport. This program does not and cannot establish the innocence or guilt of Skye. It's already been done by the justice system. But it does look at Skye's passage through that system, as well as the many unanswered questions that have cropped up along the way. This is the Wide Waters Marina Park in Lockport. A pretty desolate place in winter, but in summer it's filled with laughter and fun. So it was on August 7th, 1977, when the Lockport Canoe Club held a race on the canal for charity. It was a fun affair, a 5-mile race with costume participants carrying six-packs which were consumed at checkpoints. When the race was over, $10,000 had been raised for the American Cancer Society. At about 11 that evening, tragedy struck. Some members were cleaning up at a private afterglow party when Thomas Skye arrived with his 24-year-old brother-in-law, Alan Steuerwald, and 3 other companions. According to testimony, Canoe Club members had just confronted a motorcyclist, Michael Santillo, who they said drove a cycle onto the grounds, frightening and scattering people.
This Michael Santillo was standing by his motorcycle when there was a group of about 4 or 5 people jumped him, and there was about maybe 4 or 5 more gathered around and were beaten. As we passed, I made the comment that it doesn't take, 10 guys to beat up one person, and the fight there with Santillo broke up. Me and David Ridman got him to his motorcycle, and he left.
You have any idea why they were beating up on Santillo?
No. We just got there on the tail end of whatever trouble was going on with him. So.
There was testimony, I believe, that he had driven his cycle in over the grounds, and a lot of the people were scattered helter-skelter. And, were you aware of that?
No.
Did you know Santillo?
No, that was when I first met him, was during the trial.
Okay, and then what happened?
Well, after we got Santillo on his motorcycle, he left. And someone in the crowd, I didn't know who it was at the time, but I heard later who it was, said, "Do you want some of the same thing?" And I was hit. Somebody sucker punched me from behind. They took me down. There was about 4 guys on me at this time, and the rest moved in. And that's when the fight that I was involved in broke out.
What happened when you were down?
Well, the one person, and I found out later who this was, had me in a headlock from behind, was holding me down. The other group just moved in, started kicking and punching, so I got loose from the man that had me by the head, started fighting back.
How did you fight back?
Well, first I got loose. There was another person, who I found out later who it was kicking me. And I had a small pocket knife. Somehow I got that out and just started sticking the people that were kicking and punching me, get them off.
What kind of blade did that pocket knife have?
It had about a 2.5-inch blade.
When you were protecting yourself, striking out, were you on the ground or standing up?
I was on the ground.
There were some witnesses that testified that you were up in the air screaming, I kill, I kill. Do you recall any of that?
I didn't do anything at all like that.
Were you aware you cut anyone?
Yes. It was the man that was kicking me at me. I was aware that I stabbed him in the groin on the 3rd kick, or in the groin area anyway.
When the fight was over, 4 Canoe Club members had been cut and stabbed, and Alan Steuerwald was found on the ground nearby, dying with a stab wound in the heart. Donald Chip Case, co-owner of the old City Hall restaurant in Lockport, is a former collegiate basketball star who played for a time with the Buffalo Braves. Case, who suffered stab wounds of the chest, told Channel 17 Reports he doesn't wish to be interviewed, feeling the story is a dead issue. He said he feels sorry for the family and referred us to the transcript of the trial. Case testified he scuffled with motorcyclist Santillo, heard a piercing cry, and was not aware he had been stabbed until he felt warm blood flowing down his ribs. Thomas Weeks, owner of the Grand Island Transit Company and part owner with Case of the old City Hall restaurant, suffered stab wounds of the chest, neck, and abdomen. In refusing an interview, Weeks said he's been through a lot and didn't wish to comment further on the case. Weeks testified that after club members asked Skye to leave, Skye turned away, took 3 steps, jumped into the air with a yell. Next, he testified he heard flesh against flesh and then a moan. Weeks says he rolled off the pile, walked away, and then became aware he was wounded. He testified he did not see Steuerwald involved in the fight. Thomas Ryan IV, an executive of Grand Island Transit, suffered stab wounds of the chest and abdomen. In declining an interview with Channel 17 Reports, Ryan said he would like to forget the incident, feeling justice has been served. He commented further that he was almost killed with his stomach torn wide open. Ryan testified he had no clear memory of the fight itself and did not recall Steuerwald being stabbed. Ryan said that while scuffling with Santillo, he heard what he described as a karate yell and heard someone scream, "I kill people." Thomas Heary, a canoe club member and close friend of the other victims, was the least seriously injured. He was treated for lacerations of the arm. Channel 17 Reports was unable to contact Heary for an interview. In his testimony, Heary said he observed Skye and Ryan involved in a scuffle following what he termed party crashing by Skye. Heary said Skye reached into his pocket and stood up with a knife in his hand. Later discovered he had suffered a slight laceration. What was your first reaction when you learned that your brother was dead and your husband was accused of his murder?
Oh, we couldn't believe it. We were camping at the time that it happened, and I was supposed to call him at a certain time. I couldn't get a hold of him. I finally called a neighbor, and they told me that he was arrested for killing my brother, and we just couldn't believe it. We were trying to call the police, everybody, to find out the whole story, which we didn't get until we came home.
Has your thinking changed over the past 3.5 years?
No. As soon as I saw Tom, any doubt that might have been in my mind was completely erased.
We were away on vacation when it happened, and no one told me that he was accused, because I was full of tranquilizers, and I don't remember the first week at all, really.
What about shortly afterwards?
Well, I just couldn't believe it. Well, we were out camping, and the 2 of them would have been along too, except Tom was working, and Ellen had an interview for a job. He was supposed to come up the following day. As far as I can tell you, I mean, I've never had any problems with Tom. He's always been good to us. He would give you the shirt off his back. And especially Ellen, I mean, they were good friends. He was closer than any of us to him.
Was there any, ever any problem between
Never.
the 2 men?
Never.
Any difficulties at
No.
all? They got along very well?
Yes.
They never had, he got along great with my brother. They never argued. They got along really well together.
Has this tragedy brought your family closer together?
I would say so, yes, because I have another brother, and he was very close with my brother that died. And he came to the trial. My mother came to the trial as often as she could. And they were just as upset at what was happening at the trial to my husband as we were, because they knew that, they were good friends. It would just have been something inconceivable for him to have hurt my brother.
What is your relationship with Tom Skye?
Well, I've known him about 22 years. I guess we've been pretty close, almost brothers.
How would you describe him?
Well, the only thing I can say from my experience, he's been a good and true friend to me. He's been a loyal friend, and I've always liked him.
You ever go drinking together, have a good time?
In 22 years, a lot, yeah.
What was his behavior at the time when you were out and having a few, bending an elbow or two?
Well, Tom always made everybody laugh. It was just the type of person he was. People were, you know, his size would intimidate people immediately, but once they got to know him, everyone liked him. And he was a likable person.
How do you think your brother received the fatal knife wound?
It would have to be a complete guess, but all we can assume is that he tried to help my husband. Now, there was one of the men who was with my husband, the one who didn't testify, told us that when he went up to tried to help my husband, when he walked over in that direction, one of the canoe club members pushed him away and said, "Get out of here," and he left. And in the testimony, one of the person who it was, I don't know his name, said that he did that. A man came up with long hair and he pushed him away and told him to get out of there. So I can only assume that my brother did the same thing, only he wouldn't go away. He insisted on trying to help my husband. And then whoever it was, I'm sure we'll never know, tried to stop him, and did.
Is it possible that your husband could have accidentally killed your brother without his knowledge during the mass confusion in the fight?
That, to me, is impossible, because there's no way that he couldn't have known who my brother was. I can't see him not recognizing my brother in any circumstances. He knows who my brother is. And I have to say, my husband has been involved in a few fights in his time, and there's no doubt about that he would know his friends from his enemies.
The knife that killed Ellen Steuerwald was never found. At the trial, a forensic pathologist testified he suffered a wound 4 to 5 inches deep.
Medical examiner Dr. Lehote, I believe, testified that the wound was 4 to 5 inches deep. How big a blade do you recall your husband's knife having?
It was about 2 to 2.5 inches. It was a small pocket knife. And he carried it all the time. He used it for work. That's the main reason he had it. He used it on his job. They testified in the coroner's testimony, the size of the knife wound was made by a rather large knife. And my husband didn't carry a large knife. And the doctor's reports as to the size of the wounds on the men who'd been hurt seemed to indicate that it was a smaller knife that had done the damage to them. So there was, a discrepancy there as to the two. It seemed like there were 2 knives used.
In your many travels with Thomas Skye, did you ever observe the pocket knife he carried? Can you describe it?
Sure, absolutely. I seen Tom at least once a week. I go from Buffalo to visit him and party with him. And he had a 2.5-inch knife. You know, I've seen it many times. He cleaned his fingernails with it. When I talked the day after everything happened, I talked to the coroner, the one in Lockport, and he told me it was a 4-inch knife wound. Tom's knife was not over 2.5 inches. It would have been impossible for him to have delivered that blow that killed Ellen. It would have been impossible.
Well, for one thing, it seemed to me, listening to the coroner's report, there should have been a larger knife involved. Now, I personally know the type of knife my son-in-law, it was a small pocket knife.
Did Dr. Lehote's statement mention the depth of the wound?
Her report indicates that the blade was approximately 5 inches in length, a half an inch in width, and that it penetrated the heart, and there was a 7/8 inch laceration in the left side of his heart.
Your report shows that the wound in the victim was 5 inches in depth. There are claims that the assailant had a 2.5-inch blade on his knife. Could a 2.5-inch blade cause a wound 5 inches deep?
No, it wouldn't have gone that deep, but it would have still penetrated the heart.
Was the wound straight on?
It was downward. It was slightly downward.
Downward.
It hit the heart in a downward.
If the assailant was lying on the ground, swinging the knife, could that knife have caused the wound that was fatal to
Very
Ellen?
possible. Very possible.
But he'd be on the ground. Wouldn't it be an upward thrust?
If he was bending over, it depends on how the knife was held. If the knife was held in this manner and he thrust away from him and the man was facing him, it would be downward.
How long after the stabbing do you figure the victim lived?
Oh, less than a minute. It was, oh, I would say it was as close to instantaneous as you could get it.
We have heard reports that the victim didn't get to the hospital where he was pronounced DOA, Lockport Memorial, till about an hour after the stabbing.
No, I don't believe so. I was there less than in that time, and he was at the hospital when I got there.
When did you first learn that your brother-in-law had been killed?
The next day when I was arrested and arraigned, I found out in court at the arraignment.
Do you think that you accidentally cut your brother-in-law during the confusion in the fight?
I definitely know I didn't. He was nowhere around me when this took place.
There were just the, I believe, 4 men from the canoe club that you were battling.
Well, there was the 4 that originally initiated it, but there was about 10 altogether. It was the same 10 that were on Santillo.
You feel it definitely wasn't your knife that did it?
I know for a fact it wasn't mine.
How do you know that?
He was nowhere near me, and the stab wound that hit him in the heart, I believe it was Judith Lihote, testified that it was 4 to 5 inches long. And I don't think you can get 4 to 5 inches out of a 2.5-inch knife blade.
What did you do with the knife?
Well, somewhere along the way, I discarded it. I was leaving the park.
Did you throw it in the canal or in a parking lot, do you recall?
There was a parking lot. It was pretty close to the canal, so I don't know. Couldn't say if it landed into the canal or it was in the parking lot or that general area, though.
The current Niagara County District Attorney, Peter Broderick, was an assistant DA at the time and prosecutor in the case. He refused to be interviewed on the grounds that the case is on appeal and ordered Police Captain Henry Newman, who investigated the crime, not to grant Channel 17 reports an interview. The trial was before Niagara County Court Judge John Hogan, now retired from the bench. He also refused to be interviewed because the case is now on appeal. Channel 17 reports wish to ask Judge Hogan the following questions. If you were familiar with the victims, why didn't you disqualify yourself as did a previous judge? When you learned that 2 jurors claimed they were followed home, leading one of them to be taken off the trial, why didn't you declare a mistrial? Why would you appoint as a defense counsel a former assistant district attorney who was still on staff at the time of the arrest and charge of Thomas Skye? And finally, why did you not charge down to manslaughter instead of murder second?
Were you satisfied with the court-assigned trial lawyers who defended your husband?
I wasn't, no. No. I don't know anything about the law and about how trials are held. I've never had any involvement with trials before. But in my opinion, it just didn't seem like adequate defense.
Didn't the fact that one of them was on a district attorney's staff at the time your husband was charged concern you?
We didn't know about these things until afterwards. We only knew that the judge appointed these lawyers to us. We told the judge we didn't have a lawyer because we had told Brownstein we didn't want him. Then we told the judge that we were trying to get a lawyer of our own, but we had to raise the cash to get the lawyer. And then he told us he'd give us 2 weeks and to let him know. In a week's time, the judge sent us a letter and said that since we didn't have any attorney, he was going to appoint attorneys for us. And then the next thing we knew, we were supposed to appear before the judge, and he appointed 2 lawyers from Niagara County, or from Niagara Falls, and one of them was from North Tonawanda, because all the people from Lockport had disqualified themselves as being friends and relatives of the people who were involved in the case.
How did you learn of the fight that night?
Well, I got a call from Tom early in the morning, and I answered the phone, and Tom told me, he said, Mike, he says, I'm in trouble. He says, I think I hurt a couple guys, but he says, I tell you, it wasn't my fault. And I believed him because Thomas never came to me, you know, for problems. He said, I'm in trouble, I need help, can you help me? And I said, you know, I'll do everything I can.
Did he ask for his brother-in-law?
Well, one of the things he mentioned, he says, I don't know where Alan is. He explained to me a little of what happened. He says, try to get hold of Alan, find out what happened with him. He was very adamant about that.
And when did you find out that Alan had been killed?
It wasn't until the next day I went down and got a lawyer immediately, took some money out of the bank and hired a lawyer, Brownstein. And we went down to Lockport. The name Storwell was brought up along with, when they were saying the people that got hurt, Storwell, that he was killed, and it didn't immediately dawn on me that that was his brother-in-law. Brownstein realized that before I did and asked the judge, seeing that I was his best friend, to tell Tom. And when I told Tom, he just deflated. You know, he didn't know anything about it. It just was really bad to him.
What was his reaction when he found out that his brother-in-law had been killed and then he was accused of it?
Well, I don't think he realized he was accused of it when I told him. He just, when I told him, it's just like the breath went out of him. He just went right down, and he wouldn't talk or anything for a while. I'm sure he didn't know that, he didn't have any idea that he would be accused of that.
Did the court-appointed attorneys spend much time with their husband before the case, like weeks or so?
Well, they were appointed, I'd say, maybe 2 weeks before the trial. I'm not exactly sure of the dates, but it was shortly before the trial, and when they were appointed, it was just before Easter. And they had, I guess one of them was going away, and one of them had another case or something, I don't know, and we didn't see them more than once, I think, maybe twice before the trial, before the actual jury selection began.
Were you at the trial?
Yes, I was, for about 3 days out of the trial.
What were your observations of that trial?
Well, I'm not as naive as I was. I had thought prior to that everyone got a fair trial, you know, that all things taken into account, that the truth would come out. And it didn't happen in this case. We were waiting for the trial to convene, and Chip Case, one of the accusers, came in, walked past the judge, says hello to the judge. Judge asked him how was his family. They talked about that for about 5 minutes. Then he walked up to the recording secretary, talked with her about family matters and that, before the trial even got started. In my mind, you know, you're supposed to disqualify yourself, as far as I know, if you know the people that are involved and you're the judge. But like I say, it was amazing to me.
Do you feel that maybe he should have disqualified himself, as did Judge Hannigan earlier?
Well, if he was on friendly terms with the people involved, I would think he would have, you know, followed Judge Hannigan's example.
Were you aware that he may have been on friendly terms with any of them?
During the course of the trial, I guess I've noticed a few things. He knew the prosecution witnesses by first name.
Anything else?
Well, when they would come into court to testify, you know, they talked to each other, you know, social amenities and what have you.
I understand the public defender's office disqualified themselves because they knew some of the victims.
Right, that was told to me by Judge Hogan in his chambers.
What did he tell you?
Well, he mentioned at this time I was looking for a lawyer, and I called into Hogan's chambers. He mentioned the fact that I would find no lawyers in Niagara County because they were either friends or relatives of the people involved, and they were reluctant to, you know, defend me in this case.
Yet you got 2 lawyers from Niagara County.
Right, court appointed.
Did your husband get a fair trial?
In my opinion, no. I can't say that he did. No, I certainly wouldn't want a trial like that. They were all friends, relatives of the people involved, and they kept saying that the Canoe Club members were fine, upstanding people, and, you know, Tom was just a nobody who worked in a factory. And of course, I guess that made him not matter. He was just an Indian who went out and got drunk and went berserk. And that was his defense attorney's statement. We thought it should have had a change of venue because there was one judge who was supposed to take the case, Judge Hannigan, and he declined taking the case because he said he knew all the people involved, he was friends with them, and he would be partial to their side of the story. But Judge Hogan, who knew the same people, refused to disqualify himself.
What was your opinion of the jury?
Well, the jury had been tampered with, of course.
How is that?
One of the jurors was followed home.
Well, all along, from the time the jury was selected, both my husband and I were satisfied with the jury. And then the night before jury deliberations began. The judge said he wouldn't charge the jury for deliberation till the next day. And when we came back the next day, we knew something had happened because the courtroom was just all in an uproar. And my husband had to go into the judge's chambers, and he came back. And as soon as he came out and back into the courtroom, we knew something had happened. Just one look at his face and you could tell something had happened. And he came back later and told us that 2 of the jurors had been followed home. Now, they said they weren't sure if it was just coincidence or if someone had actually followed them. But one of the jurors was so upset that he had to be, he said it would have influenced his decision, and he was discharged as a juror. But the bad thing was they all went into the jury room and talked about it. And all the jurors knew about it before the judge knew about it. I guess the way the judge found out about it was one of the bailiffs overheard the jurors talking. And then he went and reported it to the judge.
Were you aware that jurors had reported certain incidents to the judge?
Yes, I was called into the chambers when this happened.
And what did you learn?
The jurors said that during the course of the trial, they had been followed. One, I guess, was followed home, and another one was followed partway home.
And what did the judge do?
Well, he just chalked it up to coincidence, and we went on with the trial.
And what about the woman foreman of the jury? Did she stay on?
She was one of the ones who was followed, and she stayed on. She said, she thought that she could overlook it as a coincidence. But then I think it was sometime during the course of the night, after they'd been deliberating for quite some time, she came in and said that she didn't want to be foreman anymore. And they told her, well, we've never heard anything, have never heard of this happening before, but we don't see why you have to stay foreman if you don't want to be. And they went and voted on who they wanted to be foreman, and they came back, and they had appointed a new foreman.
You still have faith that Tom Skye did not commit this crime?
Absolutely. I 100% believe that. I know he didn't. I understand he had to defend himself, but in the situation I would have done the same thing. But he did not kill his brother-in-law.
Do you feel that the difference in status in society and lifestyles between you and the victims had any bearing on the outcome of the trial?
Well, my own personal feelings, I would say it had some bearing. It's a personal opinion.
How's that?
Well, these people involved in the organization they were in, and from what I understand, they were supposed to be prominent businessmen in the Lockport area, well known in the community. So.
And you?
It's the average guy.